They hunted us like animals across the stars until one of us learned how to hunt back. The last human colony didn't know it was being stalked beneath the shattered rings of Zero's V. The outpost of Haven Reach clung to survival, a pale blue orb wrapped in static storms. Its cities were carved into cliffside craters half submerged beneath the magnetic tides that rippled through the rock inside of shield domes. The last fragments of Earth-born families whispered stories of a home they would never see. And among them walked a man who had no stories left to tell. Cale Rennick wore his silence like armor. His frame was lean, built more from necessity than discipline, with the kind of sharp, predatory calm that made people avoid eye contact. Rumors called him a drifter, a war orphan, maybe ex-military. Nobody knew for sure. He worked salvage runs in the Black Zones areas so close to radiation geysers that no one else dared to go. But Cale went, alone, and always came back. Beneath Haven's flickering artificial sky, Cale stalked through the corridors of Sector 12 with his scavenged rifle slung low, face marked by old plasma scars. He said little, but his eyes scanned everything the way a hunter watches from the brush. He knew the signs, and lately, something wrong had returned to the stars. First, it was the missing patrol ships. Then came the static interference, bleeding through comms like a low, guttural hum. Civilians dismissed it as background noise. Officials waved it off as sunspot activity. Cale knew better. He'd heard that sound before 16 years ago when the sky over Eris outpost turned black and rained teeth. They called them Velcorin. No language, no diplomacy, just monstrous instinct and a cold, calculating hunger. They didn't conquer. They called Dara fell in 30 days. Back then, Cale had been 12. He remembered the blood fog in orbit. He remembered his mother being torn apart by something with too many limbs and no eyes. He remembered being thrown in a crate and launched into space on an evac freighter full of corpses. He buried his name with his family, but the hunt, he never forgot. Now, in a dive bar buried in Haven's underdecks, Cale watched the vid screens flicker with static again. Signal disruption in Outer Ring 5. Atmospheric relay ping lost. Estimated repair time, 27 hours. No one paid attention. They laughed, drank synthale, and argued over trade route blockades. Just another glitch in the edge systems. Cale stood, eyes narrowing. He left his half-finished drink and moved toward the surface lifts. The last time he'd seen interference like that, the Velcorin had already breached the outer moons. He reached the observation deck 30 minutes later. Above, the transparent dome showed a half-clouded sky. The magnetostorm churn as expected, but then a shimmer. Not natural, not random, a cloaked signature faint, pulsing like a wound in the sky. He engaged his personal sensor rig, outdated, jury-rigged, but still sharp enough to see what others missed. The signal popped again, larger this time, moving closer. Cale's mouth tightened. He pressed his hand against the glass, heart beating like war drums in his ears. "It's them," he whispered. "It's starting again." Back underground, alarms hadn't even sounded yet. But Cale Rennick knew the first rule of prey. The moment you see the hunter, it's already too late. He turned from the dome and vanished into the shadows of the corridor, steps already leading toward his hidden locker toward a buried past he'd sworn never to wake. Inside, wrapped in cloth and rage, waited an ancient weapon, one he had torn from the corpse of a Velcorin war beast long ago. He ran his hand across its black shell. Not just a blade, not just a gun, a memory. Cale's voice was low, cold, steady. "You came looking for prey, but you're about to learn what happens when prey bites back." Asterisk, the first death was silent. A scout team vanished near Relay Station Theta 7. No explosion, no distress signal, no debris, just static. Then came the second vanishing, then a third. By the time Haven's Defense Command reacted, the outer colonies had gone dark one by one, like candles snuffed by an invisible breath. Still, no one called it an invasion. Not yet, because the Velcorin didn't invade. They fed Dot in the dark edges of Haven's labyrinthine infrastructure. Cale Rennick moved like a revenant. His presence triggered no biometric sensors. His gear was analog, his tactics pre-digital, ghosted from all networks. He trusted nothing that could be tracked, hacked, or shut down. He remembered Eris. He remembered what didn't work. A coded pulse on a scavenger's frequency pinged his terminal. Encrypted chatter from deep-orbit satellites he'd modified months ago. Only one person had access to their telemetry. Him. The signal data burned across his screen. Contact confirmed. Velocity, sublight. Cloak pattern match, 90%. Species, Velcorin, count, unknown. Trajectory, direct approach. Haven reach. Kale exhaled. Slowly. They weren't probing. They weren't scouting. They were coming. He slammed the locker closed, sealing his personal network behind 3 layers of dead encryption, and threw his code around his armor. The surface-level security force might call him a lunatic, but deep in Haven's bowels, there were still a few who remembered Earth. In a disused hangar below Sector 14. Kale stood face-to-face with the only other human who'd ever made it back from a Velcorin kill zone, Idris Harlan. Idris had once been a captain in the Earth Defense Militia, now reduced to running illegal drone tests and black market refits in Haven's underworld. The synthetic nerves in his left arm twitched when he saw Kale's expression. They're here, aren't they? Kale nodded. Cloaked. High orbit. They'll breach within hours. Idris muttered a curse in Old Terran. Kale tossed a shard onto the workbench, a dark, crystalline tooth nearly a foot long. Scavenged this on Icaron. From their forward scout. Same biosignature, same bone plating. Idris stared at the tooth. Jaw clenched. The High Council's gonna call it a rogue predator, maybe a comet. They won't listen. I don't need them to listen, Kale said. I need weapons. Idris hesitated. You're planning something. Kale's eyes narrowed. I'm done running. The council chambers above the central tier buzz with political theater. Dignitaries from Haven's surviving factions stood behind gold inlaid podiums, debating power reroutes and trade allocations. While human colonies burned in silence across the void, Kale didn't bother attending. He had no speeches to give, no votes to cast. He was already hunting Dot in the outer trench of Haven Reach, a civilian transport vessel callsign Juno prepared for a routine or run. 26 passengers, minimal escort. They never made it past the magnetosphere. The entire vessel was sheared apart mid-launch. No explosion, just severed, ripped like flesh. Rescue crews found no remains. Just blood mist frozen in orbit. Panic came slow, like frostbite. The next 3 days saw 12 more disappearances. Short-range relays dropped off the network. Drones malfunctioned. Artificial gravity glitched in entire residential blocks. Kale tracked the anomalies with the precision of a war sculptor. Every event was a prelude, a softening. He mapped the pattern, circular breaches, like feeding zones. Velcorin hive logic. He'd seen it before. He knew what was next. They were about to descend. Back in Idris's hidden forge, the old militia captain stood over a warframe wrapped in nanofiber cloth. Kale had designed it himself, not for protection, but for speed, for kill strikes, for ambush, the kind of armor predators feared. Idris clicked through the power sequence. This'll draw fire. You go full war mode. They'll focus everything on you. Kale secured the last of his weapons, a dual-mount kinetic rail and a plasma bow he had named Assong. That's the point, Kale said. I want them to see me. I want them to know prey has teeth. Idris stared at him, the silence hanging, heavy, then finally asked, You ever think you're not coming back? Kale looked past him, into the shadows of the chamber. I already didn't, he whispered. That night, a transmission echoed across all channels. It was short, choppy, unintelligible, but those who'd survived Earth recognized the frequency. It wasn't human. Velcorin used no language, but they broadcasted fear, raw emotional pulse. Designed to paralyze lesser prey, Kale listened without flinching. The message wasn't for him. It was for everyone else. He stood at the edge of the observation deck again, staring out into the void. The shimmer in orbit had grown. 12 cloak signals now, still approaching. The stars behind them began to vanish. Idris's voice cracked through his calm. They've entered low orbit. Kale, there's more than we thought. Much more. Kale's grip tightened on the rail. The black sky rippled with unseen movement, as if the night itself were alive and crawling forward. Then we fight them in the dark, he said, because that's where humans are born. The first Velcorin finally showed itself, and it wasn't in orbit. It dropped from the upper atmosphere like a comet, shedding its cloak mid-descent, a beast of impossible design. Its form was chitin and voidlight, 9 limbs ending in razored blades, a gaping chest mouth instead of a face. It crashed through Haven's mid-sector colony dome, carving a crater into the housing district before the alarms even finished sounding. By the time the guards arrived, It had already butchered 17 civilians. The defenders' pulse rifles barely scratched it. The plasma turret did nothing. The creature simply moved a blur of bone and speed, ignoring fire, ignoring fear, until it stood atop a pile of corpses. It screamed. The scream was not meant to hurt. It was meant to warn. Prey was plentiful, and now the hunt had begun. But when the Velkhorn turned to strike again, it stopped. Because someone was walking toward it. Alone. Kale Rennick didn't charge. He stopped. Each step deliberate, every muscle wound in a deadly quiet. In one hand, Ash Song, his plasma bow. In the other, a plasma spear with a blade made from the tooth of a dead Velkhorn matriarch. He didn't aim immediately. He wanted it to see him, smell him, know him. Recognition flickered in the beast's posture. A twitch. A shift. It remembered. Not Kale, specifically, but the scent of a human who refused to die. The fight lasted 6 seconds. Kale dove into a slide. Beneath the creature's charge, loosing the bolts mid-roll. The first struck its shoulder joint. The second its underjaw. Sparks and black ichor sprayed the walls. It shrieked and turned. Claws slashing, but Kale was already behind it. He struck with a spear, burying it deep between the armor plates just above the spine cluster. Then twisted. The scream died in its throat. And the Velkhorn collapsed. Dead. All of Haven Reach saw it. The cams recorded it. Civilians on rooftops and officials in war rooms stared in stunned silence. For the first time in recorded history, a human had killed a Velkhorn in single combat. IDRIS sent the footage out that night. Not through official channels, through the underground, the refugee bands, the broken colonies beyond the old border. Within hours, Kale's face shadowed, blood spattered. Unbowed spread across the surviving fragments of humanity. No speeches, no declarations, just a single word attached to the footage: resist. They came harder after that. Velkhorn hunting packs struck from the shadows, half seen, half heard. They tore through the outer levels of Haven like jackals. People fled, screamed, died, but they didn't die quietly anymore. They armed themselves with scavenged tech, with spike traps, with makeshift turrets built from stripped drone cores. Because one human had drawn blood, and blood demanded answers, the survivors rallied in the old fusion core bunkers. Kale met them by starlight. A teenage girl named Kessa Virel, orphaned during the third Exodus, brought in schematics for a lost Earth comms satellite still believed to be operational. If reactivated, it could link Haven Reach to the surviving flotilla near Jupiter's graveyard. A former engineer, Tomas Iro, showed Kale a Velkhorn shell they had cracked inside was neural fiber more conductive than any human alloy. He'd begun repurposing it into targeting visors. Even Idris began field testing proximity charges that mimic Velkhorn pulse patterns to lure them into traps. Humanity wasn't just fighting back, they were learning, and evolution was contagious. Kale led the first real strike 5 days later. Target: Velkhorn scout lair in the ruined upper comms tower. 6 known hunters, 2 hounds, a single juvenile larval sac being nested, proof that the creatures weren't just hunting, they were seeding. He took only 6 with him volunteers, not soldiers, a mechanic, a courier, a farmer, a pair of medics. Kessa, 2 against his better judgment. They moved at midnight. Under Haven's fractured sky, Kale's voice was soft, but lethal. In the earpiece, remember, they don't expect resistance. They don't think we know what they are. That's our advantage. They approached through the vent shaft. Kale went first. They struck fast, silent. Explosives rigged to the nest. Plasma bursts to the neck seams. The team moved like a single thought. When the fight was done, the tower burned orange with Velkhorn blood. No human died. And the signal from the reactivated comms relay? It went out on every human frequency. Kale stood before the cam, blood smeared on his armor, his eyes burning like orbital fire. His voice was low. Measured. Deadly. You thought we'd stay prey forever. You thought wrong. We remember Earth. We remember Eris. We remember everything you took. This isn't a warning. It's a promise. We are not running. Not anymore. The hunt is over. Now it's war. Across fractured human strongholds, battered fleets, and dying moons, survivors stood straighter. Ragged crews gripped rusted weapons. Scavengers rewired old satellites and warship husks. And the Velkhorn paused. They had tasted humanity before. But this tasted like vengeance. The Velkhorn responded like nature always does when the food fights back, with overwhelming force. In the third week of resistance, 3 hive ships descended into heaven's orbit miles-wide monstrosities of living chitin, each bristling with void spines and sensory tendrils like a planetary cancer drifting through space. They didn't cloak. They didn't hide, because prey wasn't supposed to win. They began terraforming the atmosphere, bleeding spores into the upper clouds, infecting the magnetosphere, warping the air with strange, chiral compounds that disrupted everything human built. Shield walls flickered, power grids went haywire. Gravity shifts pulsed through the dome like heartbeats. It wasn't just extermination anymore. It was reclamation inside Haven Reach. Kale Rennick stood over the battle map Idris had hacked together. From pre-Exodus Earth tech, it flickered with interference, but it was the only thing still showing real-time enemy movement. They've established 3 forward bro points, Idris said, circling areas near the reactor veins. We think they're trying to tap into our power grid, maybe convert it, or feed on it. They're not just feeding, Kale said. They're claiming territory. Idris frowned. What does that mean? Kale's voice dropped, low and tight. It means they think this planet is already theirs. Outside, the resistance was fraying. Kessa Varel lost her brother on a supply run ambushed in the magnetic canyons by a Velcoran prowler. When they found his remains, his face was gone, peeled clean. She didn't cry, not until the burial, and when it was over, she walked straight to Kel's quarters and placed her brother's dog tag beside his war spear. You taught us to fight, she said, voice shaking. Now teach us how to win. Kel said nothing for a long time, then nodded once. Tomorrow. That next dawn, under a shattered artificial sun, Kel led the largest offensive strike yet. 25 resistance fighters, 5 salvage drones, and a mobile railgun Idris had pulled from a down mining rig. The target, Velcoran Seed Node Omega, a living hive wrapped around Heaven's northern water veins. The plan was simple: infiltrate, plant charges, burn everything. Only 2 of them made it out alive. Kel was one of them, dragging a wounded fighter named Aaron through the gore-soaked tunnels. He watched the charges detonate behind him, purple fire and Velcoran ichor rising into the sky, but he couldn't stop hearing the screams, couldn't unsee the moment the hounds tore into Mari's squad, couldn't forget the look in Kessa's eyes when her best friend was pinned to a wall by living tendrils and torn apart while still breathing. The cost was unbearable, even for him. Later, Idris found Kale alone on the cliffs above Haven, overlooking the crater where the hive had once festered. You did it, Idris said. You cut out one of their hearts. Kale didn't look up. His voice was quiet, raw. Too many died. Idris sat beside him. It's war. People die. No, Kale said. War is when both sides bleed. What we're doing, this is surviving. We're losing. We just haven't admitted it yet. Idris hesitated. You thinking of backing down? Kale turned, eyes hollow. No, I'm thinking of something worse. That night, Kale vanished. Left no note, no trail, just gone. Some thought he'd cracked. Some thought he'd gone on a suicide mission. Only Idris suspected the truth, because Kale didn't believe in martyrdom. He believed in bait. 5 days passed. Velcoran assaults intensified, but something shifted. They stopped hitting the outer zones. They stopped spreading. They focused almost as if searching. They were hunting, and Kale had given them something to find. He'd taken a scavenger pod and launched into the upper atmosphere, letting it bleed a homing signal, human, taunting, laced with artificial pheromone traces stolen from a Velcoran brood. He wanted to be caught, and he was. The interior of the Velcoran hive ship was unlike anything built by hands. It was alive, breathing, every surface pulsed with bioelectric veins. Kel's senses warped as he moved deeper, the walls whispering thoughts that weren't his. But he wasn't here to listen. He was here to see. And what he found changed everything. Humans. Hundreds of them, still alive, suspended in sacks. Neural spikes drilled into their skulls, feeding data into the hive's memory core. They weren't being consumed. They were being studied. Copied. Minds rewritten into Velcoran biology. Not exterminated, assimilated. Kale stared at a child floating in one of the sacks, no older than 10. Hair drifting like thread, eyes fluttering beneath sealed lids. He clenched his fists. No more running. No more surviving. This war was no longer about revenge. It was about souls. He returned in a hijacked Velcoran scout vessel, barely intact, half conscious, bleeding from the mouth. Idris dragged him from the wreckage. Where the hell were you? You almost... Kale cut him off, voice hoarse. They're not just killing us. They're becoming us. And then, the plan formed. Not a raid, not a strike, a full-scale rebellion. Kale looked at the survivors gathered beneath heaven's blood-orange sky. You want to win, he said, voice carrying, that we burn every hive, every ship, every living thing they've twisted in, and we take back everything they stole. Deep beneath Haven Reach, in the forgotten strata of pre-Exodus ruins, the Resistance dug up something they were never meant to find. Archive Vault 9X, Orion Protocol, a sealed databank from the last days of Earth's planetary defense grid. It was protected by quantum locks powered by obsolete fusion cores, and wrapped in a failsafe that could kill a city if breached incorrectly. Kale Rennick stood before it with Kessa and Idris. His hand hovered above the panel. This is it, he said. Whatever's in here, someone on Earth thought it was too dangerous to leave unguarded. Idris stepped forward, or too powerful to fall into enemy hands. Kessa tilted her head. You think it's a weapon? Kale's eyes didn't leave the vault. I think it's our only shot. It took 2 days to break the seal, 6 people to survive the radiation surge. Inside, they found remnants of Project Helix, a theoretical neural weapon that never saw deployment. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. The files revealed that Project Helix was designed to infect synthetic minds and biohybrid networks with recursive identity loops. In short, it made enemy AI and hive minds question what they were. It didn't kill. It fractured belief. Kale stood over the flickering holo of the weapon blueprint. The design was crude, old, Earth-era tech, but adaptable. They're absorbing human minds, he said, using memory and thought to evolve. If we send Helix into their network, Kessa whispered the rest, we make them question the very thing that holds them together. But there was a catch. Helix wasn't finished. The weapon required a live neural host to stabilize the frequency. During transmission, a mind strong enough to withstand feedback from the hive's psionic backlash, it would burn through that host like a wildfire. Read the specs. There's no shielding against this. Whoever transmits Helix dies. Silence, long and heavy. Kale didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Kessa's face twisted. No. Damn it, there has to be another way. There isn't, Kale said. We either break their mind or they finish breaking ours. She stepped toward him, voice hard. We need you. You started this. You're the reason we're still fighting. Kale looked at her not with defiance, but with sorrow. That's exactly why I have to finish it. The final offensive was codenamed Ashfall. The plan: launch Helix from inside the Velcorin hive ship, using its central memory root as an amplifier. The blast wouldn't kill the hive directly, but it would fracture its neural structure, severing its connection to the network and sending a psychic ripple through every linked Velcorin. Across the system, Kale led the infiltration team personally, 6 fighters. One path. No return. They moved through the corpse fields of Sector 9, where the hive had rooted itself in heaven's deepest vents. The air was thick with spores, visibility reduced to a ghostly haze. The walls pulsed with organic tendrils alive. Listening, Kale moved like a shadow. He had memorized the hive's neural map from his last infiltration. Every pulse, every opening, every sound it made when it breathed. As they descended, Kessa's voice cracked through the calm. I should be the one carrying it. You know that, right? Kale paused, turned. You're the future, he said. She stepped beside him. And what are you? He didn't answer, because she already knew. They reached the core, a cathedral of thought. The Velcorn memory root towered above them, pulsing with stolen consciousness. Human minds flickered across the surface in strands of light. Faces, dreams, pain, all trapped in the hive's memory web. Kale stepped forward. He pulled the Helix core from his pack, no larger than a human heart. Its casing clicked open, revealing a pulsing blue seed, a symbol etched on its side. For those who remember. He turned to his team. This is it, he said. Get clear. No arguments. Idris clenched his jaw. You sure? Kale nodded. More than I've ever been. He walked into the core alone. The moment his feet crossed the threshold, the hive reacted. Pulses of tendrils shot out, recognizing a neural threat. Kale jammed the Helix seed into his chest plate port, connecting its spikes into his nervous system. Pain exploded like fire through every vein. His vision fractured. He saw Earth, his mother's face, the burning of Eris, the feel of cold metal floors and warm blood. Then the hive began to push back. It wanted him, but Kale pushed harder. You want to understand us, he whispered. Then take it all. And he opened his mind. The Helix algorithm. detonated inside the Velcorin collective not with light or sound, but with truth, memories, guilt, emotion. Sacrifice. The hive screamed not in voice, but in mind. It tried to eject him. It failed. Kel's identity as Defiance wrapped itself around the hive's core logic and broke it, like a blade of fire shoved into the brain of a god, across the sky. Every Velcorin hive ship CONVULSED. In orbit, their battle forms spasmed mid-flight. Hounds turned on each other, drones collapsed. Burrowers screamed and dug themselves into the dirt as if trying to escape their own minds. And in the heart of the hive, Kale Rennick stood unmoving, eyes glassy, body limp. But his mind, still echoing from across Haven, humans looked up and saw something they never expected. Velcorin ships falling, one by one, like prey. Kale Rennick was gone. Not in body, his form still stood upright in the Velcorin memory chamber, wrapped in the roots of the hive's neural trunk, but his mind had vanished into the weapon, into the helix, and the helix was still burning, across Haven's sky. Velcorin vessels convulsed like dying animals. Their symmetry broke, movements faltered. Hounds turned feral. Hive beasts screamed at invisible threats. The Resistance saw it. All, for the first time since Earth fell, the predators were bleeding from within. And it wasn't enough. SciFi Realm stood on the ledge of Sector 12's relay spire, watching the chaos unfold like a funeral of monsters. The stars behind the hive ships glimmered through gaps in their fractured forms, whole sections imploding as their psychic feedback shattered integrity. But Kale hadn't returned. Idris climbed up beside her, armor burned, chest rising like bellows. Signals. Still active, he said, adjusting the old neural tracker Kale had left behind. He's in there, but I don't know how much longer. Kessa gritted her teeth. Then we go back in. Idris stared at her, horrified. Kessa, the helix is still running. If you link into that. I'm not linking, she snapped. I'm getting him out. She held up her forearm, the haptic blade Kale gave her days ago now repurposed as a neural bridge, stripped and rewired with lift-threaded dampeners scavenged from dead Velcorin scouts. He bought us this chance, she said, locking her gaze to the distant hive. We finished what he started. The Resistance moved like a wave. Half of Haven Reach had collapsed from weeks of conflict and infestation, but what remained rose. Engineers armed with retrofitted mining beams, medics hauling converted railguns, survivors in scavenged armor, flying human flags on their backs. They didn't call it a suicide run, they called it deliverance. At the base of the hive, the Velcorin memory root writhed in confusion. Fractured psionic energy rippled like lightning through its structure. The minds inside the human ones it had stored were rebelling, fighting back from within. And one presence scales was burning brighter than the rest. Not with rage, but with clarity. He gave them names, he gave them faces, he gave them stories. And the Velcorin didn't know how to survive that. Kessa broke into the hive's inner spire under heavy fire, flanked by Idris and a squad of Resistance vanguard, the Carters. Grown, distorted, sick, Velcorin drones lashed out from the walls, blind, broken, screaming, but not coordinated. Helix had shattered their unity. One creature charged, and Kessa buried Kale's blade in its skull. She reached the core with seconds to spare. Kale stood, like a statue, fused to the chamber. Neural strands like glass roots spiraled into his spine and skull. She ran to him, tears falling freely now. Kale, can you hear me? Nothing, just a distant hum like wind through ash. Idris pulled out the emergency extraction spike, laced with a dampener override. Kessa, if we pull him now and he's still linked, it could cook his brain. We don't have time, she choked. The hive was collapsing, the flow buckled. One final psychic pulse was building louder than anything they'd felt before. She looked at Kale one last time, pressed her forehead to his. You were never prey, she whispered. Then she plunged the spike into the neural core. The helix detonated one final time. But it wasn't code. It was memory. Kale Rennick's final thoughts, the scream of his mother, the fire of Eris, the long silence of space. The moment he picked up that first Velcorin tooth, all of it ignited inside the hive like a sun. It didn't destroy the VELKO or RN. It rewrote them. Across orbit, the hive ship screamed not in pain, but in conflict. For the first time in their evolution, they hesitated. Their minds buckled with the weight of identity, of loss, of grief. They had swallowed humanity's pain, and it was poison to them. The pulse hit Haven Reach like a wave. Sky turned black, then blue, then white. Silence fell, and then the hive ships began to fall, one by one. like broken gods. Kessa dragged Kale from the root as it burned, his body limp and lifeless in her arms. Idris fought through fire to reach them, covering their retreat with everything he had. Outside, Resistance forces watched as Velkorn War beasts dropped mid-charge, twitching. Some fled, some turned on each other, all of them. Chains. It was not just a victory, it was an undoing. Kale stirred only once. Hours later, he lay on a stretcher in the medbay, barely breathing. Kessa was at his side. His lips moved, voice cracked like frost. Did it work? She took his hand, held it to her chest. Yes, she whispered. You made them remember. His eyes didn't open, but his mouth twitched into something like a smile. Then silence. Across the stars, Resistance signals crackled. To life, from Jupiter's graveyard to the Saturn dust colonies, voices answered. We saw them fall. We saw the light. We saw him. They came with everything. The last Velkorn dreadform, an apex hive beast larger than a city, descended into heaven's atmosphere trailing fire and despair, unlike the others. It hadn't broken when the helix pulse shattered the hive mind. It hadn't fractured. It had adapted. Now it came to finish what its lesser kin could not. Not as a hunter. As a god of extinction. Kessa Varel stood atop the crater ridge where the first Velkorn fell weeks ago. Wind tearing through her cloak, blood caked to her jaw. Kel's blade in her hands. Behind her stood every able-bodied fighter in Haven Reach, engineers, orphans, smugglers, doctors, salvagers, all wearing makeshift armor stitched with remnants of lost flags and family crests. She turned toward them, voice steady through the calms. This is where they came, to feed, where they tore our homes, our people, our history apart. But not today. Today they learned what it means to fight something that remembers everything it lost. They hunted us, and we bled, but now we stand, and we hunt them back. The ground trembled. Then the sky turned black. The Velkorn dreadform tore through Heaven's last shield dome like paper, unleashing a shockwave that flattened the sectors instantly. Its body was plated in obsidian chitin, pulsing with veins of firelight and twisted memories, the remnants of minds it had devoured. Their thoughts echoing in screams across subspace. It didn't walk. It crawled down like a planet rising from its grave. Resistance cannons opened fire spike shells, repulsor bursts, plasma-tipped warheads. Nothing pierced its hide. It lashed out with sonic pulses, turning a squad of gunners into wet ruin. Still, Kessa stood. Still, they fought. Kale Rennick awoke to the sound of screaming, not from the medbay around him, but from the hive still echoing inside his mind. Fragments of it had survived in him. The helix didn't erase the link completely. It carved a scar into it, a scar only he could hear. He tried to rise. Failed. His limbs wouldn't obey until he heard her voice. Kessa, broadcasting live from the front. Kale said we weren't prey anymore, that we had teeth, that we had memory. So today, I fight in his name. I fight in yours. Kale's hand twitched, then clenched. Back on the front, the Resistance lured the dreadform toward the mag tunnel network, in ancient vein of railways once used to ferry planetary ore. Idris had spent the last 48 hours rewiring the tunnels into a trap, a collapsing killbox rigged with quantum spikes, particle charges, and the last of their antimatter stores. But they needed bait. Kessa took the role without hesitation. She rode a stolen hovercrawler straight toward the dreadform, firing flares into its line of sight, screaming into the wind. Come on, you monster. You want prey. Here I am. The dreadform followed, exactly as planned. Kale staggered to his feet. The medics tried to stop him. He shoved them aside. He walked like a man carrying ghosts drenched in cold sweat, mind half split from the helix feedback still boiling inside. His skull. He didn't care. He could still feel the dreadform's mind, the last coherent piece of the hive. It was older than the others, meaner, smarter. And it was afraid of one thing, him. Inside the killbox tunnels, Kessa skidded into position, firing her last plasma bolt at the beast's eye. It roared, arms splintering walls as it crawled into the kill zone, massive and blind with rage. She dove out of the crawler just as the trap sealed shut. Blow it, she screamed, but Idris didn't respond. The detonator was fried. Manual activation was required. Kale arrived, bleeding and broken, at the mouth of the tunnel. He saw the crawl space. He saw the flickering ignition. He saw Kessa, and without a word he ran inside. The dreadform felt him, the one who had burned its hive. The one whose mind had torn its species in half dotted turned. Kale sprinted past falling debris, past the neural static rattling his skull, past the wreckage of the crawler and the charred remains of weapons that had failed. He reached the node, and he looked up. The dread form loomed above him, towering, breathing, alive with the anguish of 1,000 stolen souls. He smiled. You should have finished the hunt. And he slammed his fist into the core. The detonation was not just fire. It was memory unleashed. The helix remnant still buried in Kale's mind ignited on contact, sending a final psychic scream through the dread form's core. Not data, not pain. Truth. It saw everything Kale saw: the death of Earth, the slaughter of Haven, the cries of 1,000 children taken in sleep. At worst of all, the feeling of what it meant to fight back. The dread form broke, and in one final cataclysm of light and fire it fell from across the ridge. Kessa saw the fireball rise like a second sun. The earth cracked, the sky cleared, and the Velcorin were no more. No cheers rose, only silence, only awe and grief. A week later, they dug through the ruins of the mag tunnel collapse. They found his body, charred, lifeless, still clutching the detonator, still facing the direction of the beast. And in his pocket, Idris found a fragment of cloth torn from the first resistance banner they had ever raised. On it, scribbled in Kale's hand, "We are not prey." The skies above Haven Reach had never been so quiet. Where once the clouds were burned open by hive ships, now only smoke drifted slowly across the fractured stars. No more screaming, no more shadow beasts. The ashfall had stopped, and Kale Rennick was dead. His body lay beneath the surface now, interred in the crater that once held the Velcorin's strongest. They buried him where the dread form fell. No coffin, no marker, just stone stacked by hand and a plasma burn line carved into the rock above. He taught us to turn the hunt. It didn't feel like victory, not at first. There were still bodies to burn, children to bury, whole city sectors filled with rot and memory. Survivors wandered the streets with blank eyes, unsure if the silence meant safety or the beginning of something worse. But then, the messages began to arrive. Not from the Velcorin, from humans. The outer colonies had seen the hive ships collapse on their scopes. The flotilla orbiting Jupiter's graveyard heard the psychic pulse. Thought at first it was a weapon, then realized it was a name. From Saturn's storm cities to the shattered ship churches near Neptune's wake, signals poured in. We saw the light. We felt the break. We're still here. Send us coordinates. We're coming home. Kessa Virel stood at the transmitter relay, eyes raw from sleepless nights, her hands trembling as she read the names, units, and squadrons and refugee bands thought lost to the void. A freighter from the asteroid belt, a rogue Mars cruiser thought destroyed in the first culling. Families, fighters, farmers. All of them answering one word: resist. The helix didn't just shatter the Velcorin hive mind. It left behind an echo, a mental scar in the network of their surviving kind. Some of them fled into deep space, directionless and fractured. Others changed. They remembered what Kale remembered, and it hurt. Some tried to purge it, ripping their own thoughts apart in madness. Some knelt in silence and refused to feed again. A few stayed behind, watching. Silent. As if waiting. It would take years for humanity to rebuild, more to understand what they'd become, but change had already begun. The survivors of Haven Reach chose not to return to the old empires. They formed a new council, led not by politicians, but by those who had bled. Kessa refused leadership at first. Then accepted, but only under one condition: we do not rebuild Earth, she said, standing atop the ashes of the war. We build something better. Idris became the first minister of memory. He restored Earth's last archives, decrypted forbidden files from pre-Exodus satellites, and recompiled the full record of what Kale had done, what he'd given up. It became required reading for every settlement beyond Saturn. Children memorized his final broadcast. Soldiers carried his name on their tags, and above all their new flags was the symbol burned into that first helix casing. For those who remember, 10 years later, a monument was raised on Haven Prime, not a steel, but a bone, from the remains of the dreadform Kale destroyed. They shaped it into a blade rising from the earth 10 meters high, jagged and black, a tooth torn from the mouth of extinction. Beneath it was no inscription, only a single line of data etched in the helix format: a human heartbeat, Kale's last, still pulsing, still encoded, still remembered. Some say he died, others whisper his mind still drifts inside the broken hive network. watching through what's left of the Velcorin, keeping the galaxy on its dot. No one knows for certain. But the stars never forgot what happened on Haven Reach, and neither did the enemy, because now, when alien ships drift too close to the new colonies, when unknown vessels intercept Earthbound signals, when predators scan human frequencies, looking for fear, they hear a voice. Clear. We are not prey, and sometimes that's enough to make them turn away. Humanity did not rebuild their throne atop steel or conquest. They built it atop memory, the unkillable idea that suffering endured becomes defiance earned, that no matter how deep the dark goes, no matter how monstrous the gods may be, there is one species in the void that will always rise again, one species that remembers its wounds like weapons, one species that cannot be hunted, only awakened. And long after the last half ship fell, long after Kill's name became a constellation and Kessa's words were etched into orbiting satellites, a child in the reborn city of Haven asked her grandmother a question beneath the midnight sky. Did we really win, Grandma? The old woman looked up, her eyes distant and burning with something eternal. She smiled. We didn't just win, child. We made the stars afraid. That day, the galaxy learned what it means to be human. The end.